A lot of what I'm going through is covered in the book Biofeedback Mastery. Basically, we want to go through and get more comfortable with using the different modalities of the equipment that you have. Understanding some of the little things about each modality, that, you know, artifacts and how to apply the sensors, how to set up the screen, and all those things that if you do it all the time, it seems that you don't even think about it. It's like second nature. But if you don't, then there could be a big thing that you might not be doing just right, and correcting that you know, can help you do a much better job. Also, if well, you're already certified, right?
Yeah,
So,
I'm not in peripheral.
so if you decided that you were going to do the certification, then we can count some of the time of this towards the mentoring for that.
For the peripheral.
For peripheral.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
That's a good
Okay.
point.
First objective is we want to describe each of the modalities. We want to learn how to apply the sensors. We're going to do exercises where you actually hook yourselves up and look at what is a normal signal and some of the problems that you might see with the signal. And then any questions or comments you have about, you know, the modalities that we're going through, we want to go through that. Artifacts, of course, is a big issue, so we want to touch on that. And there are artifacts for each modality. Sometimes we mainly are thinking about EMG and EEG as far as having artifacts, but even, you know, if we're doing heart rate variability, there's artifacts. If we're doing respiration, even there's artifacts. Temperature, we have to look for artifacts, and we'll get into all of that. So then you also want to be able to work with the modality yourself. So, you know, hooking yourself up to EMG or temperature and seeing what it's like to actually increase the temperature or decrease the muscle tension, or, you know, learn more control over the muscle tension and so on. So that's another part of it. And, you know, what Adam always used to say is that you should spend a lot of time training yourself, you know, before you, not necessarily just before you work with other people, but, you know, he would say you should do 100 hours of training on yourself. And I don't know that most people do that. You know, I think but you learn a lot. You learn a lot from hooking yourself up. And I remember, you know, getting a little mirror, you know, with a makeup mirror. It's not that I wear makeup, but I would use it for, you know, when I'm hooking myself up to EMG or EEG, and, you know, to see if I'm putting the sensors on right. And at first it's a little clumsy hooking yourself up, but, you know, now I can hook myself up easier than I hook somebody else up. You know, it would seem like it's easier to hook, you know, another person up, but, you know, I'm just used to doing it all the time. So we'll look at all these modalities. So we'll start with the EMG, and of course with the EMG we're looking at the electrical activity that's given off when the muscles contract. And a lot of times people will say we're measuring muscle tension. We're not really measuring the tension of the muscles. We're measuring the electrical activity. So there's a difference. And I notice sometimes when we talk to clients, we can, if we're not careful, we can use wrong language and then they misunderstand. Like, for instance, I was at somebody's office and they were saying something to the effect to a client that the instrument was going to measure the person's pain. And I was like, you can't say that. That's, you know, that's totally not right. And then another thing happened is where a person was hooked up and they were in a chair that was, you know, sort of a recliner, and they were measuring muscle tension for their back and their neck, but they were reclined. So the readings were very low. And so if you combine that with a measure of your pain, they feel pain and they see a very low reading, then they feel like this stuff is not accurate, it's not working.
So they should be sitting up straight?
If you're measuring, if you're working with neck and back, you have to look at different postures, because often you're not going to see anything unusual, you know, any elevated levels if the posture is supporting the muscle. So if I have, let's say I have low back pain and I'm laying down, then, well, I'm not laying down now, but I'm laying down, the muscles aren't really having to do anything. The bed or whatever I'm laying on is supporting me. If I'm in a chair, the low back is supported, you know, so those muscles aren't even thinking they really have to do anything. But once I go from sitting to standing, now all of a sudden they need to do something for posture and to keep me standing, but they may be doing too much. So that's when you might see stuff that you wouldn't see otherwise. And we'll actually, that's some of the stuff that we'll look at more, you know, in more detail when we do the EMG class in September. But you have to think about what those muscles, whatever muscles you're recording from, what are they doing in the posture that the person is in. You know, if I'm driving, I have to use my muscles more than if I'm just sitting. But, you know, so if relaxed is, say, 2 or 3 microvolts, if I'm driving, I'm probably not going to be at 2 or 3. Maybe I'll be at 6 or 7, but I shouldn't be at 50. You know, so those are some things that you want to start looking
Maybe
at.
that would be a question to ask is which posture does it hurt most in?
Yeah, and there's also something called a dynamic EMG assessment, where you would not just have the person passively sitting and record their muscles, but you record in different postures and movements. So like with low back, you might have the person bending forward and then coming back up and seeing what's going on with left and right side and the back and so on. So yeah, you would want to ask them to do different things, and like you said, you might want to ask them, is there a time when it hurts more?
And so, and then you would measure
Sure.
the worst of them or all 3?
You would measure all 3, and then you also want to look at, okay, now are they misusing the muscles, and can I help them learn to use them more properly? So like even going back to what you talk about with golf, you might, there's not pain now, but you might be recording muscle activity while they're doing a golf swing and seeing, are they using the proper muscles? You know, are they tensing a muscle that should be relaxed during the swing? So with the EMG, you've got, of course, needle EMGs and surface EMGs. Which one are we using?
Surface.
Right, of course. So, if we did needle EMGs, we probably would get our clients back for the session number 2.
Now, maybe you'll get to it, or Eric has it in the book, but I'd seen really, detailed sheets of norms for each muscle. But is there a general, below 2 or 3 microvolts?
That's what
good?
I use. I usually say 3 or lower is my goal. Now, that's not exact.
Right.
And like you said, you could have different numbers for different muscles. But another thing that I look at is if we just went out in the lobby and grabbed the first 50 people we found and brought them in here and hooked them up, they're not all going to be below what level the book says they're supposed to be, right? But most of them are probably not having symptoms where they need to seek medical help either. So you're not always going to have someone get as low as the book says they should get. And I've had multiple times where a person had muscle tension that was elevated, and say 20 microvolts or so, and maybe they got down to 4 or 5 microvolts and their symptoms went away. So do they care whether they're at 2.3 or if their symptoms went away, they really don't care. So there may be some added benefit if they can get to what the book says, but we're also dealing in the real world, and we have a limited number of sessions, and also I think if we get we have the goal, we work towards that goal, and also we're tracking the symptoms, and if the symptoms go away and we're getting close to that goal, then I think that's what we're looking for. And I think for me it's just easier to use a single number just in general. Now if we're working on something very specific, then maybe I would look at what the textbook says as far as what exact number this muscle should be at for this particular application. But for just overall, headaches and just general types of pain and things like that, I just use 3 or lower. Some people are able to get to 2 or even lower than 2. But in general, I feel like if a person is below 3, they're fairly relaxed.
And if the trend is down from where they were,
I think there's a basic way of doing EMG, which I think most people aren't even doing that, you know. And then I think there's a super advanced way of doing EMG that, you know, there's certain experts that are doing it, and most people are never going to get to that level. Like if he said, if he could say that it's more complicated than EEG, then I think he's doing it at a level that most people are just not going to get to unless they, you know, just specialize in that area. I was just talking to Carol Shiflett, who I'm going to be doing an interview with that I'll do a video recording of. She wrote a book about migraines, and so she also feels like there's a lot to know about the muscles in order to do EMG biofeedback at a better, you know, in a better way. And so we'll probably get into some of that, but it was interesting to see, you know, some of this stuff. But I'm gonna interview about the migraine. So she does biofeedback, but she also has a lot of information as far as muscles and things like that. So with EMG, we have 2 different narrow and wides that we have to deal with. So you have narrow placement and wide placement, and then later on we get to narrow filter and wide filter. So they're 2 different things, and we have to keep them straight. So a narrow placement means that you're going to have the sensors close together. So these would be the sensors or electrodes, and they're spaced in a way that they're close together. A wide placement is where we can use sensors like these, or let's see if we have another one. Yeah, these are other sensors that we can use for wide placement where they're separate, and so we can have them spread further apart. So like when we do a placement where we've got 3 sensors on the forehead, for frontalis, that would be considered a wide placement because the 3 sensors are farther apart. Also, if we do 1 channel on the back where we have a active sensor, the ground, and then another active sensor, that would be considered a wide placement because the sensors are farther apart. When we have it like this, they're close together, so that's a narrow placement. And some of the differences between narrow and wide have to do with the area that we're recording. So if they're close together, then the area that we're recording is smaller. So the number of muscle fibers that are giving out electricity that we're picking up is a smaller number. If we have the sensors further apart, then it's picking up a wider area, and so it's picking up from more muscles. So the reading is going to tend to be higher, and it's not as specific. So if you were trying to, for instance, if you were doing rehab, which I don't think either of you are, but if you were doing rehab, you probably want to place the sensors close together because you want to focus on a particular muscle. And also in some of the sports stuff, you might want to focus on a particular muscle. If we say that, you know, and I don't even have an example of a muscle to give you right now, I'm not coming up with one, but let's say there's a specific muscle and you want to just record from that muscle should be firing during this movement. You want to just record that. You don't want to be recording all the neighboring muscles. Right. If you want to be specific. So in that case, you'd use a narrow placement. Yeah. But if you just want, let's say for instance in tension headaches, one example of a placement would be a wide placement, very wide placement, is you'd have 1 sensor on the frontalis, and that would be an active, and then you could put a ground here, and then you could put an active down here. So you're recording from the facial muscles, and you're also recording from the neck, upper back, because all of those muscles could be involved in a headache. But you're not being specific at all. You're being very general.
And you're recording a few different muscles, not just one.
Right. So you don't know whether most of the activity is coming from the frontalis or it's coming from the trapezius. You just don't know. But the idea is you want all of those muscles to be relaxed. So that's why you might use a placement like that. But if you want it to be very specific, then you'd use 1 set of sensors for the frontalis and another channel with another set of sensors on the neck or the traps. So this is basically saying what we're measuring. We're measuring the electrical activity under and between the active sensors, and we also would be picking up other things like other muscles that are nearby, the heartbeat, 60 hertz, anything like that could also be recorded. So the signal is larger when the muscles are close to the skin and smaller when there's fatty tissue between the muscles and the electrodes. So this can be a little tricky because let's say, for instance, you have a person that is obese, but they have tension. So when you put the sensors on the surface of the skin in certain areas, maybe like on the forehead, it's not going to make a difference. But if you put the sensors on the area where there's a lot of fat tissue and the muscles that are beneath are tense, you may not pick up that much of the EMG signal because it's being lost before it gets to the surface of the skin. So you have to be extra careful in situations like that, not to just assume because you got a low reading that they don't have any tension. You might just not be picking it up. So you might do things like use a wide filter and things like that so that you can pick up more of the signal that is there. So that's one of the, that can be a challenge sometimes. And we do try to use the term sensors instead of electrodes because it just sounds better. Placing the sensors closer together, you usually get a lower reading. When you put them further apart, you get a higher reading because more muscles are being recorded. Now this is where some of the page numbers come in. So it talks about cleaning and simplifying the signal. We're not going to get too deep into that. That's just the sort of technical stuff that happens with the equipment and how it takes the raw signal and presents the reading on the screen for us. We also want to look at filtering. You have band pass, high pass, low pass filters. Again, we don't really have to get into that too deep. The main thing I want to get across on that is your narrow and your wide filters. Because on your instruments you do have that setting, and that is on the sensor itself. There's a little switch that I know for myself I need my glasses to see. There's 3 positions on it, and one of them is a narrow filter, and then the other 2 are wide filters. So most people are using the narrow filter almost all the time. Most people that I know.
And that's the lower number?
That's if you're holding it so that the numbers and letters are the right direction, it would be when the switch is all the way to the left.
What are the numbers and letters?
It's 400N. It starts with 400N to the left.
Okay.
Then you get 1600W. And then 400W.
Okay.
Here it is.
Paperclip. I have one.
So this
I have
is
one. It's okay.
this is showing what it looks like here.
Oh, I got one. Okay.
And the if you have it all the way to the left, it's a narrow filter. In the middle, it's 1600W is a wide filter. So the W stands for wide. And then 400W would be a wide filter. Now the number has to do with the maximum amplitude. So for stress management types of work, we would use the 400. Either 400N for narrow or 400W for wide. 1600 would mainly be used for applications like certain types of rehab. If people are doing like maximum contractions, maybe certain types of sports applications, you might do it, strength training, things like that, where you're expecting very high amplitude readings. Now, let me just go back to this.
So, yeah, we're not doing PT, we wouldn't worry about the 1600.
Right. Right, you mainly just want to know, are you on narrow or wide filter 400?
So are there 3 designations then? It sounds funny.
There are 3.
So somehow I thought that it was just 2.
There are 3 possible. So you have 3 positions. All the way to the left is
Narrow.
400
Yeah.
narrow.
Okay.
Then the middle is 1600 wide, and then 400 wide. So
So most of the time you leave it at narrow, but the second most often most used would be the middle one, the 1600?
No.
No, it would be,
the one all the way to the right, the 400 W.
Okay.
So just think of 400 narrow or 400 wide.
that's what the 2, all right.
Yeah.
That's what confused me.
Right. And these are the actual filters. So with the narrow, your filter is set at 100 hertz to 200 hertz. So what that means is that any muscle activity that's below 100 hertz is being ignored, and anything above 200 is being ignored. So you're only seeing the muscle activity between 100 and 200 hertz, which is usually plenty for what we're doing. But if you think about it, if you compare that to the wide band, 20 to 500, so it's picking up a lot more. And if you think of, for instance, like certain applications, let's say like maybe a stroke rehab, or where a person can barely contract the muscle at all. If you're trying to give them feedback for contracting the muscle, and they happen to be contracting the muscle, and it would be showing, let's say, at 300 hertz, if you use this filter, you won't see it. You only would see it if you're using a wide filter. I think also in pelvic muscle EMG work, people tend to use a wide filter because some of the activity would not fall within 100 to 200 hertz. Also, you could have someone who has some excess muscle tension, and you don't pick it up because it is falling within, outside of the 100 to 200. So it's like you could have activity. So let's say this is our frequency here, and we start at 0, and let's say this is 100 hertz here, and this is 200, and then 500 is out here. So the narrow filter is just going to show us activity that falls within this range. But we could have something that's this high in amplitude over here, and we wouldn't pick it up in a narrow filter. Or we could have something over here, we're not going to pick it up in a narrow filter. We would only pick it up if we were using that wide filter. That would be 20 to 500. So that's the difference. But also, you might say, well, why would we use the narrow? Why wouldn't we use the wide? But if, let's say, for instance, one of the common things that happens is if we're using a wide placement on trapezius, or not even wide placement, but if we're using a wide filter on trapezius, we pick up a lot of EKG from the heart. So that activity tends to fall between about 40 and 90 hertz. So we would have this big artifact from EKG, which would be within that signal. So you'd be seeing your EMG going along. Let's say you're recording EMG and you get a big pulse, and then it goes along and you get a big pulse, and it goes along and you get a big pulse. So it makes it more difficult to work with it. So we say rather than have to work with this, we just do the narrow filter and we cut that out, and we would then not see that. So that's one of the reasons why we would use a narrow filter. And it's one of those things where you have some pros and cons, and you just say, you know what, I'll go with the way that just seems easier. And in some situations, you might decide to switch over to a wide filter. One of the sort of rules that I think I heard from Eric Pepper was that you use a narrow filter on the trunk of the body, and you can use a wide filter on the extremities. So if you're working on legs, arms, I think on the head you could also use a wide filter and not have the problem of EKG. You still have some other things that you might be open to, like artifact from equipment and stuff in the room.
So narrow filter, which
Narrow filter on the trunk
On
of the
trunk.
body. So you think about how close am I
Right.
to the heart.
Yeah.
So if you're working on the chest, the back, anywhere like that, then you're going to be more likely to pick up the heart artifact. But if you're on the arms or the legs, you're going to be less likely to be concerned with that. Okay?
Can I ask a elementary question? But
Sure.
I've forgotten all this since my exam.
Sure.
Can you explain basic electricity, the difference between the hertz and the microvolts?
Sure.
Thanks.
And we get that all the time.
Good.
Especially in the EEG classes, we get that. But you have, so this would be our amplitude. So when we talk about 3 microvolts,
Oh, okay.
it's like that. So when you see your signal going across the screen, it's showing microvolts. In fact, when you're looking at EMG on your equipment, it doesn't show hertz at all. It's not showing anything to do with
And the
frequency.
microvolts is the intensity of the signal?
Yes.
Okay.
So the frequency is set in the filter. So when we talk about this, 100 to 200, that's the frequency, that's the hertz, but that's locked in. And all you're seeing is the amplitude in microvolts based on that. If we switch to a wide filter, then you're seeing the amplitude based on the wide filter. So you see it's taking the amplitude that falls within that and giving you it's taking the amplitude that falls within that frequency range and giving you the reading.
So it'd be lower most likely, the amplitude, in a wider filter?
A wide filter will actually give you a higher amplitude because it includes more.
Oh, yeah.
So if I'm including this and I'm including this and this within this 20 to 500, then my reading is going to be higher than if I'm only including this. So you have which frequencies am I including? That would be our hertz. So that's going this way. And then the amplitude is how strong the signal is. Okay?
So what frequencies are included is the hertz, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good way to think of it.
Right. It's like a window. This is the window. So this is a narrow window. There's other stuff going on, but you're not seeing it because you're only looking through this. Whereas if you open it up here, now you're seeing other stuff. It's like, we look out this window, there's cars and there's there's people, we can't see them because our window is limited. But now if we took the whole wall out, then we could see everything out there. So we'd see more, so our amplitude would be higher, right? So that's how I would think about it.
So when you choose that, so you don't see that on the screen, it's just measures
No.
the microvolts and the time, right?
Right,
Okay.
right. Now, there's another type of EMG that doesn't process the signal in that way, where it would show all of the frequencies on the screen. That would be considered raw EMG. But with this system, we're not doing that. We're just looking at a processed EMG and just looking at a single line that's showing the amplitude for a chosen frequency range. So that's been, in a way, it kind of simplifies it.
Yeah.
Okay?